Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Should I Stay or Should I Go? I always expect to hear the music when I do that, but we haven't got music this time, which is a real pity because, well, I've got some moves. Apparently they're really bad ones though, so let's not worry about it. So this is a joint event between Fife College and Kirkcaldy, and the Kirkcaldy project is the Climate Action Fife project, which is part of climate change engagement, looking at, as it says, climate action, looking at the climate change emergency, and there's a partnership involved in that. Fife College is one of the partners, obviously Kirkcaldy, Fife Council, Fife Communities Climate Action Network. Easy for me to say, apparently. Just to have another sip of coffee, I'll be fine. And so this is one of the events that we're organising together with CAF, for want of a better term. And it's basically looking at the impacts of holidaying, whether it be abroad or the new term staycations. We held an event like this a couple of years ago, at which point almost nobody had heard of the term staycation, so we had to explain what it was. However, COVID-19 has obviously changed all that, and we're all very familiar with the term staycation now. This event really is looking at the situation out with COVID, so either prior to the COVID lockdowns or hopefully after we're on top of the COVID situation. So I don't really want to be discussing whether or not a staycation is a good idea with COVID and with green planet, so no, not planets, zones, green zones, countries, amber countries, red countries. I don't know, it was on the TV this morning and even the government minister didn't understand what each one was. So I'm not going to try and go there. So we're not talking about the green countries and things. We're talking about staycations as a general principle and whether it's better to fly abroad or whether it's better to stay on holiday in Scotland. So to help us do that, we have an expert panel here today. So we have Anna Hughes, who's the director of Flight Free UK, Billy Mackie, who I think some of you will remember, who is a former, that's it, wait, Billy, yay. Who's a former Fife College travel and tourism student and also a former employee of TUI. We have Gordon Robertson, who's the Director of Communications at Edinburgh Airport, and Sonya Peres, who's a project manager with Students Organising for Sustainability. So to kick the panel off, we start off with a panel discussion. So the panel members each get 2 minutes to introduce themselves and give a little bit of an overview, if you like, of their thinking and their argument. Then we'll go into a panel discussion. At that point, I'd really look forward to questions from the audience, from students who are here today, and lecturers or anybody else who's here really, who wants to ask questions and delve into the panel. Don't feel shy. The panel members are all up for a good debate, so that's brilliant. That will last until, well, according to my script, 11:58. But anybody who knows me knows I'm not that good with time, so it'll be about 12-ish. Then we're going to have a 5-minute break and go off into breakout groups where we're going to discuss much of this in much more detail and then come back and wrap it all up. So hopefully that's clear for everybody. So to open up the introductions, everybody gets 2 minutes to introduce themselves, as I've said. So Craig waved at me. Does that mean I've done something wrong, or is he just waving because he's happy?
We were going to have the opening polls before that.
Oh, sorry, I have done something wrong. I've got a script and it's just there, but it's just a bit outside the range of what I can see. So before we start, I could see the time, but nothing else. Before we start, Craig's going to do something, which is called a poll. Let's go with it, Craig.
You're just trying to steal my thunder, John. Keep the spotlight on you. Yeah, so we thought that just to kind of get an opening idea of what people's thoughts are about flying, we could, and staycations versus holiday abroad. We thought we'd run a quick poll and just get some opinions. It's only one question. And what we'll do is we'll run this poll again at the end of the event and see if anybody changed their minds. In a second, the poll is going to pop up on your screen and just pick your answer. So here we go. Would you consider choosing a staycation over a holiday abroad? Staycation or abroad? Okay, I can see the votes are coming in now. Still a few more people to vote. The panel can vote, the facilitators, you can all vote as well.
And remember, this is not COVID related, so try and imagine remember what life used to be like and imagine what life hopefully will be like regarding holidays.
We did start to plan this before COVID was here, didn't we, John? So
I know I was a young man then. Don't laugh.
okay, thank you, everybody. I think that's everybody voted now. So we're not going to give away the answer. What you said, we're going to save it till the end because we don't want to influence your second vote, because we will do this exactly the same question at the end. Okay, so that's it for me. And now I'm going to hand back to John.
Thanks, Craig. Keep me right, please, for goodness sake. But I'm on time, so that's a win. We're winning already. So the order I plan to introduce the speakers is actually the reverse order of the list. So Sonya, if you can go first, and then Gordon, and then Billy, and then Anna last. So I like to mix things up. I was going to do a straw draw thing, but I can't do that. So Sonya, if you'd like to kick off, please, with just 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to Gordon next.
Yeah, thanks, John, and really, really happy to be here. I think it's a very interesting and important topic. So my name's Sonya Peres, and I'm a project manager, Scotland project manager at Students Organising for Sustainability, and we basically support students to learn and lead on sustainability through a variety of programs and campaigns. And so basically, my position on air travel is that we absolutely need to limit our air travel to the best of our ability. Air travel, and particularly short haul flights, so from Edinburgh to London or even just to Europe, is particularly carbon intensive. It's the most carbon intensive form of travel. The biggest issue is that demand is expected to rise. So if left unchecked, air travel may account for 20% of our global carbon emissions by 2050. That's absolutely absurd to me. And another issue is that technological fixes just don't work. They're not acting fast enough. It's too little too late. Batteries aren't yet able to fuel commercial jets. We don't have enough agricultural land to grow enough crops for biofuels. Carbon offsetting is just too complicated, too hard to measure. And again, it just excuses our sort of reliance on fossil fuel infrastructure. I also worry quite a bit about the social impacts of air travel. So in the UK, 15% of the population takes 70% of flights. Flying is an elite activity. Not everyone is doing it, but it's contributing so much to the climate crisis. So it's complicit in something called climate injustice, which is where the impacts of the climate crisis are disproportionately felt by certain groups that don't presently and historically contribute to the climate crisis, poor groups, Black and Indigenous communities. So I'd like to also caveat, like, while I believe we should limit our air travel as much as possible, I recognize that sometimes we have to fly. So I'm Indian Canadian and I live in the UK. I'll probably never be able to completely eliminate my flying, but I will try my absolute best to limit it because it's absolutely impossible. It's absolutely imperative that I do. And so I can do this by making my trips abroad longer, communicating my goals to my family so they don't expect me to come home for every single holiday, various things like that. I also think sometimes flying just affords us those brilliant opportunities that we wouldn't normally have. And I think we should take those opportunities. We just need to remain absolutely conscious that of the carbon emissions from each flight, and that, you know, we really should consider with each flight, what's the actual benefit? Is this worth it? Does it add to my life? If it does, consider going. Absolutely. I think we should just limit. And lastly, I don't think it's solely our individual responsibility to limit flying. We absolutely need help from governments and employers. We need cheaper rail tickets, more annual leave to be able to travel by ground rather than air, all sorts of things. So we absolutely need support on a larger systemic scale to make limiting air travel easy, but also fairer. So those are my thoughts in, I hope, under 2 minutes.
Thanks, Sonia. That was great. And I think you were about spot on, but to be honest, I was so engrossed in what you were saying, I forgot to look at the clock. So bad John. Gordon, over to you, please.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm Gordon Robertson. I'm Director of Communications and Sustainability at Edinburgh Airport, and delighted when Kirkcaldy asked us to participate in this debate. I guess the exam question set by Craig and John is, do people prefer holidaying abroad at home or at home, and why? And should we be encouraging people to opt for more staycations to benefit the environment? And I guess where I come from, and as a kind of personal point of view, I think people generally want both in terms of should we stay or should we go? I think people want to both stay and go. I think people like variety of experience. Certainly before this pandemic hit, I was thinking about 2019. I holidayed in Islay, which was fantastic. We set ourselves a goal of visiting as many Scottish islands as we can, but we also had a holiday in Italy and visited Verona, and it was a great experience. And you know, we enjoyed that. So I think people, I realise I'm a kind of sample group of one, but I think people want a bit of both. And certainly, if the pandemic's taught us anything, I think we've been thinking about the different experiences that we can have when things are lifted. I don't think it's the airport's job or anybody's job really to tell people what to do. I think from an airport's point of view, we look to try and offer choice and facilitate travel if people want to do it. You know, if people want to stay at home, then that's up to them. And if people want to travel, then we will facilitate that. I think I agree with Sonya there in terms of it's down to people's choice, and I think that's probably the debate we have to have. I disagree with Sonya in that I think the elite nature of it, I guess that's on a global level, but you just need to come to our terminal and sit and see the people coming through, and it's all stratas of Scottish society that do that. So I think where we are is, I think the debate needs to be changed here, and to talk more about, for the reasons that Sonya, for example, was saying, that flight plays a role in human interaction and the way we run our life now, is to focus on how we make that sustainable in the future. I also disagree a little bit on the technology, and I think that's coming up more quickly than people anticipate. So the other thing I would say is, if we're going to have focus on staycations, I think we have to have a debate in Scotland about our infrastructure. So, for example, topically in the BBC today, there's a story about the amount of camper van usage because of COVID that has gone up, but we don't have enough spaces for them. So I think there's a debate that we have to say, in terms of tourism and in terms of the infrastructure we have in Scotland, how do we cater for what I think is going to be a rise in staycations? You know, the Brexit effect, hotels up and down Scotland don't have enough staff now. We just need to look at how does that work. So for us, I guess where I'm coming from is if this is to be the case, I think we need to have a broader conversation about how we manage it, and a broader conversation about how flight is going to be sustainable in the future and what people are going to use it for. That's broadly, I think, my 2 minutes, and hopefully I got John in under the time as well.
Thanks, Gordon. I think you did. Again, I got way too engrossed, so I'm going to be better with the timekeeping, but Billy will keep me right. So Billy, if you want to come in next, please.
Hi there, really excited to be here. I think it's great that we're having this discussion, because I do feel it's something that's essentially important, especially in this day and age. A little bit about my background. I'm a travel and tourism student I used to be at Fife College, and I studied up to my HND. I've also grew up in the travel industry, basically. I was a holiday rep, I've worked in the airport, and I now work as air cabin crew for jet2.com. On the topic, it was something that I really found difficult to decide, because I'm one of the ones that's, my job is to fly, but I was kind of on the fence, because I would have a holiday in the UK maybe for like a long weekend away or something like this, but I do enjoy the experiences that different countries and different places could offer. A few of the points that were raised earlier I thought that were great, like when Sonya was saying earlier about reducing the flights to maybe London and things like this. This is something that I would probably agree with, and think that it would be more beneficial to the environment and things if we could use rail to travel down here, but for the destinations that we can't access, we would need to fly. So there is always going to be the demand for it. So I do think it's about being as balanced as we can with it, and trying to make sure that we're being as sustainable and putting all the right processes in place almost. I love going overseas, and of course my job is to fly people across, and I see the enjoyment that that brings. So myself, I would probably be the one to go abroad, but like I said, I was always on the fence, because I enjoy a holiday in the UK as well. yeah, I think that's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Billy. Really good points. Thank you for that. And finally, Anna.
Unmute, joking. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. And yeah, like the rest of the panel said, it's really nice to be here and speaking to you all today. My name's Anna Hughes. I'm the director of Flight Free UK. A little bit about my personal background. So I'm a behaviour change specialist. So I've worked in sustainable transport for about a decade now. And I also haven't flown for that time as well. So more than 10 years that I haven't been on a plane, but I haven't not travelled. So I'm also a flight-free adventurer. And we've already heard from Gordon and from Billy about how exciting it is to travel and how important it can be. And from Sonya as well, from, you know, as you said, Sonya, having family overseas. And yes, I agree that going abroad is really exciting and it really opens our eyes, and there are so many fantastic experiences that are quite important, that can be quite important to us, that we can have. But I would absolutely say from my own personal experience and my professional experience that doesn't rely on air travel. So Gordon, you mentioned Islay and Italy, both places that I have also been to and very much enjoyed, neither of which I flew to. So there are so many options for us as travellers within the UK and also within Europe. Yes, Scotland is a little bit further than my personal journeys, which are from the south of England. So I do appreciate that it's easier for me to jump on a Eurostar and be in Europe in a matter of hours. However, I also speak to a lot of people who do live in Edinburgh, for example, and who do train vacations to the continent as well, and say that that's a perfectly viable way of travelling and a very enjoyable one too. So quickly about my group that I run, Flight Free UK. So we were set up a couple of years ago, and we have two main aims. Firstly, to inform people of the climate impact of aviation, and secondly, to inspire them to travel by other means. So the information is all about the carbon weight of the air ticket that you buy. So Sonya already hinted at that. It is many, many times more carbon heavy to travel by air than it is to travel by train, for example. And there are other ways as well of getting around, of course. We've already mentioned camper vans, etc. And the inspiration comes from sharing those stories that show it is possible to have wonderful travel experiences without getting on a plane. A couple of the ones I just sort of hinted at, we have many stories on our website about people who have journeyed from all over the UK. So not just people like me in London who have it easy, but yeah, people from all over the UK who have had fantastic travel experiences all over the world, in fact, without flying. So yeah, that's just a very brief introduction to me and my work. And I know already from the things that we've already talked about, and I've scribbled some notes frantically, I know we're going to have a really good discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Anna. Sam, you spoke earlier on about some of the challenges around the existing travel systems, if you like, so rail tickets versus planes, etc. How would you see that being addressed, either policy-wise or taxation-wise, or what thinking have you got around how to address that disparity? It's cheaper to fly to London than it is to catch a train. So it's not only quicker, it's cheaper. So how could that be addressed?
Yeah, I think two ways. So jet fuel isn't taxed. So I think taxing it so that flights are a bit more expensive and not so convenient, I suppose, for a group of the population to be able to take better train infrastructure. And then I think a really, really important one is actually from HR and from our scheduling in universities and colleges, really giving people more time to be able to travel via ground, travel by train. So perhaps instead of having like 5 days of annual leave with 2 days of travel where you can work on a train. So I think we need flexibility in our institutions as well, alongside proper taxation and better rail infrastructure. I think also there's like a cultural change that needs to happen. So I really think that right now we see air travel as a bit too convenient, a bit too easy. And I think we don't really, when we travel and we go on a trip, we don't really see the journey there as a part of the trip, but rather a means to an end. So some sort of cultural change facilitated by an institution, facilitated by infrastructure and systems that support us to see, you know, the train journey as a part of the trip and as like a valuable part of the trip as well. So various areas that we can do that.
Okay, thank you, Sonya. Just as a sort of admin point, I can't see if anybody's waving who wants to ask a question. So if you can communicate through Craig, and I can see Craig at the moment, so Craig can wave if anybody else has a question they want to raise. Thanks, Craig. Is that somebody has a question, or is that you understand the point? You understand the point? We planned this in advance. It's going really smoothly. So, Gordon, you touched on as well the lack of infrastructure to cope with the potential staycation demand. Do you see that as a supply and demand issue, i.e., if people find that there is the infrastructure available, they will use it, or do people need to be using it and overfilling it before the infrastructure we put in place? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. I think obviously just the volumes have gone up, and I don't think we put a lot of thought into infrastructure in this country, perhaps. So you'll create something like the North 500, or I think the recent one was the Kintyre 66 or whatever, which are great, but all the other bits haven't been put in place. So the North 500 has been plagued, for example, with the lack of electric charging points, or the lack of campsites, so I think we need a more rounded thought about tourism in this country in terms of, if we are going to do it, and it is one of our biggest industries, how do we support that, and what infrastructure do we put in place to manage it? And I think there is a case that if you make the product better, or it's easier to use and it's a more enjoyable thing. If you're in the North 500 just now and you get stuck in a camper van queue, and then you get to your campsite and you can't do it, and you've got to sleep in a lay-by, and the lay-by's got overflowing bins, and you can't find a cash machine, and you can't get into the restaurants, you're maybe not going to come back. So it's a view of saying, well, how do we manage that to make it as good an experience as it can be, and have the capacity to deal with maybe the increased numbers that we're perhaps going to see following this period, and more people perhaps like Anna deciding they're not going to fly and experience that. So we need to look at that, but we also need to understand that Scotland in particular has a capacity, and maybe look to signpost people as well. For example, I think rural staycations at the minute are up, but the cities at the minute are crying out for people to come as well. So it's maybe trying to make sure there's a range of things that people can see, particularly as we recover from COVID, because I know we're talking about COVID, but that is the next 2 years of recovery. I think it's really important that we can try and spread that as much as we can.
Thanks. And Billy, I think you raised a really important point regarding the pleasure people get from flying abroad, going on holiday and coming back. In your experience, and I know you've had a lot of time as aircrew, but obviously you've had other time as well. Would you say that experience of flying abroad and coming back from holiday is greater than they would get from a staycation holiday? Or is it actually just, if you like, the holiday joy that they get, and they could get that joy just as much in either as they can in Italy?
I think it's probably down to personal circumstances. If you've never been on a holiday abroad, of course it's going to be this fantastic, amazing journey that you could go on. But like Sonya, like having family overseas and things like that, even something as special as that, being able to go and see loved ones and holiday with them and see them and things like this. I do think you could get as much enjoyment out of a holiday here as you could abroad, but again, it would depend on your circumstances and what experiences life's already gave you and things like this.
didn't unmute then. Yeah, okay, that's that. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. And Anna, I mean, you talked about traveling to Italy by train, I guess. How did that compare, for instance, in journey time and experience with flying to Italy? Because obviously, if you fly to Italy, you get on a plane in Edinburgh, you get off in wherever you get off in Italy, and it's about 4 hours, and you get off and it's warm. Whereas if you've gone by train, you've had a whole journey experience as well. So how would you say they compare as an experience for the user?
Yeah, I have in the past flown to Italy as well before I stopped flying, and travelled there by train and by car as well. It generally takes a shorter time to fly, even when you have factored in all the extra time. So we can often get a bit wooed by the headline time of a flight, which is, it would be a couple of hours in the air, but that doesn't include getting to the airport, waiting at the airport, check-in, baggage claim, all of that stuff, which does add up to the point where where you're flying short distances, a lot of your time is spent just waiting. Whereas when you're traveling over land, yes, the overall time is longer, not much longer necessarily, but all of that time is enjoyable. All of that time is part of it. And Sonya already mentioned that the journey is part of the adventure and part of the trip. And I totally agree with that. And I feel that for somewhere like Italy, the climate is different, the language is different, the scenery is different, and the culture is different. And my experience as a traveler is much richer when I see how all of that connects to my experiences in the UK. So yes, traveling, just simply the first part of that journey, traveling the length of the UK from Edinburgh to London in the first place, that's such a great train journey. And then to have the excitement of going through the Channel Tunnel and then coming out in France, in northern France, and thinking, okay, this looks really, really similar to southern England, and gradually it changes. And then you get the Alps, you get those incredible mountainous views, the language on board morphs, people get on and off the train gradually through France, through it depends on what route you're going, Switzerland, but probably just straight into Italy. So you will hear those languages being spoken around you. And when you get off the train, you have already had a very absorbing and enriching experience. Whereas when you get on a plane, you are very removed from all of that stuff, and you're literally airdropped into a new location. And while that can be exciting too, I remember that first flight that I did take to Italy, and I'd got on the plane in London with my freezing cold toes because I wanted to wear flip-flops, and I got off and the air just hit my toes, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. That's also, I'm not going to pretend that wasn't exciting, but you can still have that and more by traveling by other means. And the most important point for me is I just simply wouldn't choose to fly anymore, knowing the carbon cost. Sonia's already hinted at it. And for me and for all of us, I think we know we're in a climate emergency now. So I would say that choosing to travel by that low carbon means is an important choice that we can and should be making. And it doesn't mean that we miss out in the slightest.
Excellent, thanks, Anna. Billy, do you want to come back in? Cool. If any panelist wants to come in, we'll now go to the show me your hand, and you can come back in. So if you can mute when you're not actually speaking, and then raise a hand if you want to come back in. And Craig, interrupt me at some point if you need to. So Billy.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. So we were talking about like driving from the UK to Italy. So say if 184 people done that, which is like the average on a 737 aircraft, what would be more detrimental? Would it be the aircraft doing that one flight with the 180 odd people on it, or would it be the 180 cars going across there?
Good question. Okay, so if everybody were in a car by themselves, then it would be far worse for all those cars to be on the road in terms of the carbon impact. The difference is that it's very unlikely that all those 180 people would drive to Italy, because it's just a pain. It takes ages. It's so easy to fly there. And again, coming back to what Sonya said, by the way, I agree with everything Sonya said. I'm just going to be like, as Sonya said, it's about the cultural aspect of this and our expectations of travel. So because we can cheaply and quickly and easily get to Italy, we go there. if that wasn't an option, then we would choose to journey closer to home. And yeah, yeah, that kind of the driving versus flying thing. Italy, perhaps, you know, it is possible to drive there, and I'm sure people do. One of the things about flights that's more kind of relevant to that perhaps is like, let's say Bali, which is a very popular holiday destination. You wouldn't drive to Bali. So the accessibility of flights does encourage us to go long distances. One more thing about the car versus plane comparison: as soon as you put 2 people in that car, the carbon footprint is lower per person, per passenger. So for example, if you I'm just going to get a bit technical here. So for a short haul flight, per passenger per kilometre, you're looking at 1.6 kilograms of carbon dioxide per passenger per kilometre. For a car with 2 people in it, you're looking at 0.9 kilograms. So that's 1.6 kilograms for the short haul flight. It's 0.9 kilograms for the car with 2 people in it. Obviously, that you have to double that if you're only having 1 person in the car, so that does make it bigger than the flight. But yeah, if you're going to Italy with a group of 4, for example, that's way better if you're driving with 4 of you in the car, and much more fun.
And I think, I mean, it's a good question, Billy. And I think the key difference is, if you look at the hierarchy of travel, you would have flying, which is typically the most carbon intensive, and then cars, and then diesel trains, and then electric trains, and then, you know, the super electric trains. So once the journeys we have in Scotland, for instance, on the little diesel ones running around Fife, they're the least energy efficient and the most carbon intensive trains, but they're still better than flying in carbon footprint per passenger. When you get to the Eurostar and then the sort of French and continental trains, then you get to a much lower carbon footprint, sort of orders of magnitude less than flying. I see there's messages flying around with questions. Does Pamela, you can just ask it if you want, Pam, if you want to come in.
Sorry, just trying to unmute there. Quick question for you. I personally know people who have already booked more than one holiday, now that we're kind of getting down to some easy figures for COVID, etc. But they are kind of going abroad for holidays as opposed to going on staycations. And there's a kind of attitude for some of these people that it's not my problem. So when I heard Gordon talk about airports saying that they're there to facilitate travel, surely they should be there to educate people as well. I'm 54, so I'm slightly older than a lot of the people in the class. And to be honest, until I started doing this HNC, I knew very little about sustained development, especially the impact of tourism. And I've learned an awful lot since that and made a lot of lifestyle choices, I think to the benefit of the environment. What I want you to know for the panel is, if people are taking substantial amounts of holidays, is there not some sort of impact assessment that we should be using so that people understand and are made to understand what the impact of their decisions are, and then put in place penalties that help fund things like we've now got, and I saw it yesterday on the news, we've now got a net zero minister, Michael Matheson, who's got a history in justice and transport, which is quite an interesting combination. But should we not be using these people who obviously find it affordable to go abroad, and certainly it doesn't play on their guilt that they're going abroad? Should we not be penalising them in some way and saying, well, if you're going to have 2-3 holidays abroad every year, you know, for leisure, then should you not be paying for that? Sorry, that's my question.
Thanks, Pamela. That's a really, I think that is actually the crux of the debate, probably. I see Gordon's straight in, so yeah, Gordon, come on.
It's actually something we've been discussing. The UK government currently has a consultation on air passenger duty, which is the sort of current tax on flying. It's not going to be popular with some, and one of the suggestions they have is halving APD for domestic flying. I think this is some UK government view to try and bolster the union and look at the recovery. But one of the options they put forward is a frequent flyer tax, and find themselves in a bizarre position where the UK government's asking the same as the Scottish Green Party, which also put forward a frequent flyer tax, I think, in its manifesto. And it kind of goes to that point that Pamela's putting, that you basically, the more you fly, the more you pay. The difficulty there is how do you manage that? How do you, how do you do the administration on that? Spreadsheet with everybody's name in it. It's very difficult to track. Or if I buy it with my credit card and then, my work's credit card buys my work flight, then how do you reconcile those? And that's too difficult. What we've been saying is that, so one of the surprising stats, is, the average spend of an international tourist that comes to Scotland is £800. And the sort of carbon cost of that, if you look at carbon, is about £5. So our view is we should be taking some of that taxation, which the Treasury just pours into the big black hole, and looking at how do we, accelerate the technologies, how do we look at managing that, or educating people, which I think is a really good point as well. So the point we're trying to make is, let's get some of that data and transparency into the discussions, because if we're going to affect cultural change, like Sonya and Anna and William have talked about, and I agree on that we need to have a proper discussion about it. And I guess that education has to be across the whole of people's carbon output, whether that's what kind of meat you eat, or how do you get your energy or your waste. And certainly as a business, and I would imagine the college and other businesses that look at your carbon footprint, and you look at where does the energy that you use come from, and you get a holistic picture of that, and then you can make informed decisions whether you want to, for example, take the car to Italy, for example, as we've been talking about, or you want to fly. And there's other considerations in that, I guess, which is time that you have, and then you can make a choice on how you want to spend your time and how you want to spend your resources. So I think Pamela makes a good point there about actually the broader education of the issues that we have to face, and then the decisions that people make on that once armed with that data.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gordon. I'll go to Anna next.
Yeah, just as a point of clarity. So as you mentioned, Gordon, the consultation on APD, and for everybody here, that consultation is open until the 14th of June, and the government is taking anybody's responses. So I would recommend looking that up and putting in your responses, because the proposal is, as Gordon outlined, to reduce the APD, or the tax, on domestic flights, which seems to be a bit of a strange move, especially when countries across Europe are increasingly discouraging domestic flights, yet our government is not doing that. But Gordon, you mentioned a frequent flyer levy. Now, actually, in the consultation, that has been rejected by the government. So they have stated that they're not going to pursue a frequent flyer levy.
We're still asking consultation opinion on it, though, still.
They. The wording is quite clear, though. We don't agree with introducing a frequent flyer levy. It's pretty much what it says. So it's unlikely they will. That's one of the measures that would help for people to see the impact of their flights in money terms, because as we know, money talks, and the fact that flights are so cheap means that we kind of don't really think about the wider impacts. But at the moment, you get rewarded for flying more. You get air miles. So that just seems to be a bit backwards of what's happening. And I think that's the issue here. We need to be more aware as consumers what we are buying. So perhaps on each airline ticket, or at the point of booking, it should tell us how carbon heavy that flight is compared to other things we do in our lives, compared to other forms of transport. So that's all part of the information that's making an informed choice. And the final thing I'll just make a point on is the problem of the phrase frequent flyer. So the family that Pamela mentioned, who takes 3 holiday flights a year, they might not think that is a difficulty, because everybody knows someone who flies more than they do, right? Everybody will know, okay, the person next door, they're on 6 holidays a year, or 6, or a work trip every other month, every other week even sometimes. But in technical terms, to be a frequent flyer, to qualify as that 15% of the UK population who takes 70% of the flights, you only need to take 3 return flights a year. And I challenge you, no one who takes 3 return flights a year would see themselves as a frequent flyer. And I think that's one of the problems. The whole language, the whole concept, we don't understand our place in terms of the wider context. So that's something that also definitely needs to be addressed.
Sonya?
Yeah, I think something else that's interesting with taxation is that I think the rich will always pay to pollute. So while we may have frequent flyer taxes, I think people that can afford to fly will continue to fly. So it needs to be thought of more holistically than that. And I actually think an interesting thing, there was a survey that Possible, which is a sustainability organization campaign, they did it in 2019, and they found that 61% of people in the UK would limit their air travel, but that number rose to 69% when people knew that other people were also limiting their air travel. So frequent flyer levies, interesting, but might just not really do much if people can already afford to continue flying. But limiting your flying, communicating that, shouting about it, letting it be known to all your friends and family, that could also, play a really big role in limiting air travel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you look at the plastic bag tax, a 5p tax on plastic bags reduced consumption by 90%. So presumably the people who were still consuming them didn't mind. But even a small amount of taxation on plastic bags reduced it, and now they're doubling it to try and get to the end of that. Billy, I haven't seen you raise your hand, so I'm going to move on to the next question unless you want to come in on this urgently. No, okay, thanks. I've got Craig's hand up.
Just another question from the audience. I don't know if you're happy for me to pitch that now.
Yeah, please do.
So it's from Samantha, and I guess it's a question comparing the emissions from flying with the emissions of other forms of transport. And she asks, if you cut the number of short haul flights and you cancel them, would you not see a raise in emission from other types of travel, such as train? And I just wonder if anybody would like to talk to the difference between those emissions.
I can do that if you're not sick of my voice already. So roughly speaking, we can only take averages based on average load and average emissions, but it gives a broad picture. The DFT, Department for Transport, have got quite detailed stats on this. So broadly speaking, if you're traveling by train on, as John mentioned earlier, on a continental train, which is typically electric, your emission savings will be a factor of 10. So it's 10 times higher if you fly. So that's a 90% saving. If you are traveling domestically by train, typically diesel or electric or a mix, it's 6 times the difference. So air travel is 6 times higher, or train travel is 6 times lower within domestic travel. So always the best is those international, continental, 100% electric trains. Obviously, it depends how that electricity is made, but often it's better on the continent because they use nuclear. Whether or not we agree with nuclear, it is it's low carbon in terms of the footprint of that particular journey. So that's generally what it is. And all the other forms of transport kind of come in the middle there. So car, we've already spoken about car and load there. Motorbike is lower than that. Coach is actually really good. So a long distance coach travel is always an option. So that's good in terms of per passenger emissions.
I think that answers the question well. I mean, basically, if the same number of people travel the same journeys and switch from plane to train for the domestic short haul flights, it would save carbon. Obviously, you'd save more carbon if people didn't travel at all. As soon as we're looking at vacations, you've got to assume that people will be traveling still. But it's interesting that we're not traveling today where we would have done pre-COVID. So the carbon saving of this meeting, if you do the calculation on server emissions and all this sort of stuff, we're still saving carbon. And I think that one of the points that was raised earlier was the who pays. I think Pamela asked that, who should pay, or whose responsibility is it? And there's often a lot of debate around I think Sonya mentioned it, it tends to be the wealthiest globally, certainly, who are doing the most flying, and the most affected by climate change in the poorer countries are doing the least flying. And there's this, I suppose, it's called, in economics, it's called externalities. So it's the thing you don't put on your spreadsheet. And one of the externalities of flying is climate change emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, climate change impacts, etc. Gordon, how would you accommodate these externalities, as, if you like, as an airport operator in a more fair manner, given that it tends to be a global wealthy population that are flying, a global poor population who are suffering the impacts of it?
Yeah, that's, I guess that's difficult to ask Edinburgh Airport to deal with that on a global level. I think what we can try and do is deal with that on a more local level, and hopefully show the way, or try and do best practice. So we are just about to launch our latest version of our sustainability strategy, which looks at sustainability in a sort of rounder way. So there's 4 pillars. One of those is carbon, but the other one is more about how we fit into Scotland and the world, and how we spread success that we have from the connectivity we generate. How do we be a better neighbour? How do we create better jobs? So for us, a sustainable airport is more than just sustainability in carbon terms. It's about how does this entity, although it's run privately, but benefits Scotland in terms of generating connectivity. What does that look like in 2040 for 2045? And so that's where our thinking goes there. And I think you know, we did that through a lot of materiality. We've spoken to lots of our stakeholders, from communities that are overflowing to, you know, the jobs that we create and the things that we do to try and make ourselves as round as possible. In terms of carbon, you know, again, we have to try and be leaders there. So we're in scopes 1 and 2, we're currently neutral in scope 1. Scope 2, we're going to be neutral in the next couple of years in scope 1. Scope 3 is the biggest challenge for us, and again, that's where we start to look at things like sustainable aviation fuels, and some of the things and the technologies that we can push, I think, you know, again, will benefit aviation as a whole across there. You know, the inequality position here is that, again, as I said, if you come and look in our, if you look at our passengers and you look at the socio-economic breakdown, we cover most parts of society in Scotland, and you know, this tends to be a global issue. But I think we have to be very vocal in how we see aviation and the airport itself being part of Scotland going forward, and a sustainable part, but not just in terms of carbon. And a lot of that is to do with the reallocation of wealth and spreading the benefit across as far and wide across Scotland as we can.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I noticed I dug out one of your what's it called, airport master plan, and had a look at it in preparation for this. And I saw the forward by the chief executive, Gordon Dewar. I don't know if he's still chief executive or if he's. He is, yeah. He was saying we concentrate not just on the 5 million Scots that we serve, but also on the 7 billion people across the globe that wish to enjoy what our great country has to offer. I thought that was a bit of an interesting way of viewing it, because I would suggest to you that of the 7 billion people across the globe, there's a big chunk of those who are actually more worried about the impacts of climate change than whether they can afford a flight to Edinburgh. You know, it feels a bit of an interesting way of viewing the model.
Yeah, so I guess if you go back to what is our role, you know, we're not forcing people onto planes. What we're saying that, you know, if people want to come to Scotland, our job, I guess part of it is to, and we talk in connectivity terms, is to make it as easy as possible for people to come. We believe that people coming to Scotland is a good thing. They bring, whether it's visiting us just for a holiday, or coming to live and work here, or it's foreign students, or it's whatever, they all bring bits of culture, many of them come and live here, it enriches our nation. We think connectivity does that. So our job, I guess, is to create the channels and make it as easy as possible. The decisions to fly aren't our decisions. That's up to people that want to come or not. And again, we would say that I think aviation broadly is aspirational. It allows a whole lot of things as well for Scots going across the country, across the globe. We've got a massive diaspora across the world. The Scottish government are very keen to, in terms of exports and in terms of, in the latest manifesto, the Scotland in the World concept, where, the international outreach of the Scottish government is something they're very clear about. So, all of that fits together, and, setting aside staycations and the reason for flying, I guess where Gordon's coming to bear is, like, well, how do we get that connectivity, those channels and that network to allow people to, if they want to come, to come?
Okay, thanks, Gordon. I'm going to have to do that chairing stuff that I hate, because this is a really interesting discussion. I just want to carry on doing that. But what I'm going to do, looking at my timesheet, I'm going to give each person 1 minute to sum up their view on the panel discussion. Then we're going to break for 5 minutes for a comfort break. And then I'll be 2 minutes late, and we'll break off into the student discussion rooms, where we're going to talk about what we've heard and answer some more specific questions on the discussion. So better do it in the same order I did last time. So Sonya, do you want to give me 1 minute to sum up, please?
Okay, on the spot. So it is possible to explore the world and to gain lots of opportunities through collective ground travel. We might not be able, some people might not be able to completely eliminate traveling. That's okay. Just be really conscious about each flight. Know that air travel is the absolute most carbon intensive form of travel. So every single flight you take, if you have to take it, has to be worthwhile, you have to maximize those carbon emissions. Please don't see air travel as something convenient that you can do. It's a serious thing. The climate crisis is absolutely serious. While if we just look at Scotland, while air travel might benefit a lot of Scots, a big issue is that a lot of people in Scotland are gonna, face the impacts of the climate crisis. A lot of people living in poverty, a lot of people with disabilities, and our air travel is going to impact people in Scotland, not just people around the world. So I guess my overall message is just to really start reflecting more on air travel. Don't see it as the easy option. Really think about whether or not it actually is going to benefit your life, if it adds to your journey. Otherwise, take the train. Otherwise, go on Zoom.
Thank you, Sonya. Sonya, that was really well summed up. Gordon, you get a minute, and keep it to a minute, please, because you've had a lot of time just before we finished.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think we all agree here the enemy's carbon. This is what we're all trying to fix across our lives and all the choices that we make. I don't think the enemy here is aviation. And I think aviation obviously has a responsibility and it contributes to it, and it contributes greater than perhaps other transport modes. But I think the debate should be focused on how do we make aviation sustainable, so that the people coming behind us, generations coming behind us, can enjoy all the things that we've all enjoyed through the ability to travel. But we need to make sure that's done in a responsible, carbon effective manner.
Brilliant, thanks, Gordon. Billy?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't think that I disagree with anything that was brought up today, and I would probably agree with Gordon saying that the issue is actually, it's not aviation or anything in particular. I would probably say it's actually down to ourselves and our own mindset. In regards to trying to offset it, something that keeps popping into my head when we were discussing about this was like some sort of almost tracker. So if you were going on holiday, you knew how much carbon you were going to use, but then maybe setting yourself the goal 6 months before to be like, well, I'm going to cycle to work so I could reduce that. I'm going to eat less meat. I'm going to walk to the shop instead of taking my car, and trying to use things like this. So it's built into us as an almost habit, and then we could reduce it, and then you've almost rewarded yourself for using that. That was just something else that I wanted to add in. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Billy. You've just opened a whole can of worms there with personal carbon budgets and carbon credit cards that we then, so gosh, we're not going there. Not go, let's. It's a really interesting point though. So thank you for that. Anna, you get the final word at this.
Yeah, just it is a difficult one because although, as Gordon and Billy have kind of suggested, perhaps it is aviation really the problem? Well, it is in terms of it being the highest carbon form of transport. So and the fact that it is very kind of ingrained in our culture, to the point where we think of holidays and we do think of an aeroplane. You know, that is sort of subtly spread throughout our culture. And most of us who are in kind of a high bracket of earnings, and when I say high, I mean 30 grand plus, which isn't even that high, we are able to take those flights whenever we choose. And I think Sonya's got a great point there. Really consider if that's necessary, because the fact is we are in a climate emergency. The climate crisis is real. It is desperately important. We shouldn't actually be burning any more fossil fuels at all, you know. And so if we are doing so to take holidays, then I would urge people to reconsider, or to very much be aware of that impact, especially because when we're talking about justice, and I know Gordon mentioned about the range of people coming through Edinburgh Airport is large in terms of their social backgrounds, but the fact remains that 50% of the UK population do not get in a plane in any given year, but everybody suffers the effects. We all suffer from climate change effects, and we all, especially those living near airports, suffer from noise and air pollution. So I would say to answer the question of staycation versus going abroad, I would always choose, obviously not to fly, even if I do go abroad, but staycationing, big thumbs up. And I've done a lot of traveling within the UK. And one thing that was mentioned right at the very beginning about the variety of experiences, which Gordon rightly said is important to us as travelers, you can absolutely get that here in the UK. I've cycled thousands of miles around this island and I still haven't seen everything on offer. So yeah, big thumbs up to me for staycations.
Great, thanks Anna, and we're all going to go out and buy bicycles now and try and keep up with you, which isn't going to work for me. It's definitely not going to work. Okay, well, look, panelists, thank you. That was a really interesting debate, and I think you brought to the table topics that some of us hadn't thought about perhaps ever, or in some time. So I think that's really interesting when you open up the debate and you give us some more food for thought. So thank you all very much, and thank you for obviously offering different viewpoints, but also agreeing on some of those points as well, which is really interesting. That, you know, you look at the list of people who are on the panel, you think that's going to be a Stussy. But in fact, it was a really interesting debate where there were areas of common ground and areas of obviously discussion and debate. So thank you all very much.